Okay, we're gonna figure out how to turn the music off. Okay, done. Nice, that was smooth. Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you very much for coming to the Design Systems Coalition meetup. Special editions sponsored by Figma. Thanks to Meetup for this great hosting space. This is awesome. And also thanks to Figma for the spread and for Meetup for helping make all of this happen. So yeah, clap. So I wanted to start off with a quick shout out tonight. Some of you might know it's International Women's Day today. So I wanted to, oh yeah, clap. These are all the speakers. All these women have spoken at the Design Systems Coalition meetup so far. As you might know, it's a free meetup, so anyone that speaks at this does this for free and puts in their own time. So massive props to everyone that has spoken at this, and today especially thanks to the women. And also thanks to our women speakers today, who are sort of hiding over here. So Natalia has got some great stuff online. Some of you might know I'm pretty into color in design systems, and it's something that I've spoken on and done a lot of research on myself, and I was really excited to stumble across all the work that Natalia has done. So definitely check that out if you have a slight obsession with color like I do. And in Chesley, both of us worked at Etsy together for a while, and I have this very fond memory of us updating the Etsy font, which took a huge amount of work, and Chesley definitely took the brunt of it. We actually ended up with a whole team working on it. And I was just like super amazed at the sort of detail she went into and running all the experiments to check things that weren't breaking stuff or causing problems. And so it's really, really nice to have her here speaking today as well. Yeah, you can clap again. Lara, can you be my cheerleader every one of these? So I just wanted to make sure everyone knew what the format was. Hands up if this is your first time at Design Systems Coalition Meetup. Woo, okay, I like it. We've got like kind of 50-50, been to one before, new people, that's awesome. Okay, so the format is we do like 5-10 minute lightning talks. And then we go into a Q&A discussion with all the speakers together. I kick off with a few questions, and then we throw it to the audience, which is what this hashtag is for. So if you think of questions as someone is doing a talk, it's great if you can tweet this and hashtag it. We might not get to everyone's question, so if it's on Twitter and you're okay with using Twitter, this is another way to sort of get questions answered outside of this meetup. So we'll show this again when we get to the Q&A session. Okay, so now we're going to move over to our first speaker, which is Natalia, and we're going to do a little laptop swap and try and make this smooth. Okay, you get that? Okay, put that there. So Natalia works at the New York Times, and yeah, and done, and over to you.
Yeah. Hi, first I want to say Happy International Women's Day. Thank you for being here. It's just so good to see everybody here today. This is a really special one for me this time around because I have a 3-month-old baby girl, and it's like, I got to wish her a happy Women's Day today. I was like, yeah, you don't know what's going on and you're drooling a lot, but like, this is for you. But I also wanted to take the time to acknowledge just a big reason of why I'm here and I'm standing in front of you all is because I always try to give back to the community that gave me so much, and there's so many women who put in hours after work and just weekends, everything to help me kind of find my way in tech And I'm one of those designers who learned to code, so more on that later. So I just want to acknowledge just some of them just off the top of my head. Like, this isn't going to be the Oscars where you have to play me off with music. But, like just, Jen Simmons helping me with the layout. A bunch of the designers actually really helping me with layout. She is the only reason I know CSS Grid. So if you haven't seen her stuff, please do. And, of course, I have to give thank you to the Women Who Code Austin, actually, who were some of my first tech meetup friends. So with that, we're going to go straight into the thing you're here for today, and it's just talking about tools for collaboration. And why are you listening to me? Because I have a microphone, yes, but hello, my name is Natalia. You can now take very nice, flattering photos for Twitter and tag me so work knows where I am. And why I had to leave a little early. And so I work at the New York Times. I'm a software engineer. I'm on the front end, and I am that liaison between design and development. And I also, in my ample spare time, I teach modular design patterns with React at the Harvard Extension School. And in my other spare time, just kidding, there isn't anything left after that. Actually, I come out to design system meetups and learn from really awesome people. And one of the subjects that's really near and dear to my heart is, like, how do you get started? Because, oh my God, everything looks like everybody's figured out design systems. They're amazing. And, like, you've got, like, the GitHub design system. It's perfect. And you've got, everybody's already using Bootstrap. And they've got, like how do you get started when you're at your job and you're looking at your code base and kind of doing that, like, I don't think we can do this yet. So I love tackling that, like, that first beginner question. And I also love this question, like, what if you're the only one who cares about design systems? And tomorrow when you go to work, you're like, you guys, guess what? I was at this meetup, I was so inspired, and we gotta do this thing, and everyone's like, it's Friday, please stop. So, like, what if you're the only one who knows how much better, like, how much more reusable your components can get, how much faster, like, your velocity and SEO and all those things, you can shout it from the rooftops, but, like, how do you get started when you're the only one who cares? Because ultimately, the way you're greeted when you're like, I'm enthusiastic about this is like, oh my God. Yeah, that's what we really need is, like, more tools to make our lives better. Why don't we just throw that in the backlog for, enthusiastic McGee? It took me so long to find this gift. And then I stared at it for a while and didn't write my notes. So you're greeted with this kind of like, oh, we don't need another tool. Like, we just want, like, no more as seen on TV, kind of like, this gadget will solve all your problems. So really just to distill it, at the bottom of it, like, what are we really trying to do? We're just trying to get some good communication going, because at the end of every conference talk, at the end of everywhere, you're like, well, we really found out at the end that it really was just about good communication. And it's like, well, yeah. So, like, building tools to improve your communication. And I like to expand on that and saying, like, it's about creating transparency and communicating your mental model. And because, at the front end where the design systems live, it's like, that's where the seam is, where you connect design, development. You've got two disciplines, each with their own set of concerns and, like, priorities, just meeting there in the middle with its poor CSS, just holding everyone together. Like, I'm design, but I'm also code. And I love CSS, and it doesn't get enough love. So, like, happy Women's Day to CSS. I don't know. I feel like it needs hashtag, I don't know, tweet that one. That'll be the only takeaway, if anything. So it's communicating your mental model. Like, what are the designers thinking and working with, and what are we working with in the code? And so rarely do we have transparency. And usually you'll get someone be like, well, you should just learn to code if you want to. And it's like, okay, fine, I am a designer who did learn to code, and you're still wrong. You should still just communicate and build tools for collaboration, because we need one of everybody to build stuff. So I'm going to show you an attempt I made to get started on something. So like let's just start simply. We're not going full design system here. This is just to, like, what I built on a fun hack week that actually ended up being something that started more conversations, showed my mental model to some of my coworkers, and they actually really liked it. So I'm gonna hope things don't implode when I, oh yeah, all right. And I'm gonna just keep on expanding that. So here is the website on staging, as you can see. You can't see this part, and a lot of stuff isn't loading on purpose. So this is the New York Times watching app, and to give you a little more context about this, this is like, we had a lot of movie reviews, and people don't know what to stream, and people don't know what to watch, and we're like, here you go, we've got you. This is coming to Netflix. This is suspenseful, and you can pick it. Like, we're narrowing things down, providing a valuable service to the streaming community. And one of the things I noticed is, you know that thing where you just like, hey, here's how I'm coding this, but here's my sketch asset here, and these don't line up, and you have these conversations back and forth, like, oh, this is like 20 pixels lower than it should be, and it's like, oh my God, we're trying to build systems and amazing things. Why are we talking about pixels? So I went ahead and built, I'm just gonna show this. See this little thing that shows up only on dev and staging and never on the thing? And when you click this little hand emoji, I created a designer's debug tool, which I'd be like, look, this is our layout. Yeah, it's the 12-column float. Don't show Jen Simmons this. But when you're rapidly prototyping, a go-to framework is pretty okay. You know, just being like, here's, you know, you want things to line up with these, and just showing that. So we're gonna hide that. Also, custom properties are amazing. If CSS custom properties, the future is here. So you can like hide that layout, and then like, listen, if you're just trying to line it up visually anyway, I got you. I promise this is baseline. You can also, again, designers love changing colors of things. Ooh. That was the first thing I added to this. And then again, it was like, okay, listen, when we're talking about like nudge this up or nudge this down, I don't think we're really communicating about the right things. So check out all the boxes I see. And this is like that scene in The Matrix where you're like, I see this when I look at this. I don't even see content anymore. It's just like shown, and it highlights it like here, like, do you mean this go up? Because now it's gonna touch this. Is this in the middle? Do we want it centered? What is this button? How much space is it taking up? And so this ended up being a really funny tool, like, hey, look, here's how I see it. What are you designing for? And I also played around with it a lot to make it look like a Moleskine notebook, which I have a red one, if you can't tell. You can see. So at the end of the day, even if like nobody wants to use this, I got to learn how to use custom properties in a way that is debatable if it's still useful or not, and kind of play around with fun animations and making ribbons, because this is all just CSS. It's just one React component that I can throw on any project that we decide to prototype next, so that designers don't have to do that thing where they do that, like, I'm really measuring stuff, but I'm really just taking a screenshot. Is this lining up? Oh God. So great, now I screenshot somewhere. So that's it. That's just an example of like, we can build amazing things. We can build pretty much anything. We're like, yeah, social network, no problem. I'll code that up on this weekend. But when it's like, wow, communicating code to a designer, no, they just have to switch jobs, switch disciplines, get into boot camp 3 years ago. This is too complicated. But you know, if you have the chance to take some time and think about like, what can I create that that'll give some transparency into the code? How can I get started when we're just prototyping something, or we're just, you know, working on something and I can't roll out a full design system, or it'd be like, hey, look at all the button types we have. Like, that's the usual go-to in every tutorial. How can you communicate your priorities as like a UI engineer or a front-end developer to someone who's like, I'm just trying to make sure the user's looking at the correct thing. I'm trying to figure out the information hierarchy here. And you're like, there are a lot of boxes that you're gonna be like throwing my way. I need to make sure they all align this way and that way. And you can also like make a nightmare of like, here's how I really see it. Please don't complicate it. Anyway, so when you're building, just to kind of sum it up, when you're building tools for collaboration, remember that collaboration is a product. Your team dynamics are a product. It's not just about whatever app you're working on. It's always a process. Like, team building is a process, or collaboration is a process. And if you neglect it, you're just gonna be like that frustrated person at the end of the day being like, oh, designers, am I right? Or like developers. And it's like, you could just be like, it's wonderful and amazing and everything's fine where I am. So if anybody wants to say hello after, I am around, probably by the dessert table over there. And if you have any questions, I would be delighted to meet you all. I see a lot of new faces here, so I'm excited to see you all. All right, thank you.
Hands up if you've used the screenshot tool to measure stuff. Yeah, yeah, me too. We just all need a Natalia to help us. Okay, I'm not good at help. Okay, I will, yeah, if you hold that, I will talk while signing into my computer. Okay, so next up we have Jackson, who is holding the microphone. Thank you. Yes, you are next. Is that okay? So next we have Jackson, who's now awkwardly standing here because he had to help me hold the microphone. So I'll keep it quick. He's a principal UX developer at Priceline.com, and he's here to talk about modern front-end tooling for design systems. Over to you.
Thanks. You ruined my next slide. I'm Brent Jackson. This is my handle online. This is my avatar. I've had it for like 10 years, if you might recognize it. I'm a principal UX developer at Priceline. I'm also 1/3 of a company I started with a couple buddies called Compositor. I do a lot of open source projects, notably base CSS, CSS Stats, which is a static analysis tool for CSS. Haven't updated it recently, but it still works. Also Rebase, which is a React component library, and more recently Styled System, which is something we use at Priceline. And I'll talk briefly about that. I love tools. I'm very excited about this meetup. So much so that one time I was actually called a tool. I had to let these people know, and they apologized in the end, which was great. I actually didn't mind being called a tool in this case, but besides the point. So I work at Priceline. I just wanted to give a quick background of where we are with design systems. Priceline is a 20-some-year-old company. It survived the dot-com boom. There's some like old legacy code in there. There's like hundreds, maybe over 1,000 like different code bases and applications. Some stuff hasn't been deployed for like a year or 10 years. It's kind of interesting. I like it. And before I started, there wasn't much talk about design systems outside of Malix in the audience. He and a few others, he works at Priceline with me, had a hackathon project called the Design System. It's actually really cool. The problem was no one was really using it. And part of the issue was that Priceline has historically had siloed teams where there's people that work on the hotels, there's people that work on flights, people that work on rental cars, and some other teams that you're not sure about. And they all have their own applications, they all have their own code bases. Kind of a typical problem for like larger companies. There was a lot of talk about common components. What they meant by that typically was node modules or like shared code pieces. Sometimes they would look at the date picker calendar. They would say like, this thing should be common. We should just make this the same across the board. And people were like, yes. But they weren't really talking about that for buttons or for headings or for like type styles, colors, things like that. They were actually pretty consistent with colors. Like the Priceline blue was Priceline blue for like 18 years. It was like in the code base, everywhere you found it, precise, it was great. They also didn't do a lot of open source work. They had a GitHub org, but there weren't any actively maintained projects. A few people had tried it in the past, but hadn't really caught traction. And at the time, I started last June. The front end team, which is predominantly based in the New York office here, they had decided, they have a lot of Angular apps. They decided everything new is going to be written in React. With that, we're going to use styled components, which is a really great CSS and JS library. If you're not familiar with that, recommend checking it out. And they also made heavy use of NPM for kind of managing dependencies. So GitHub, I love GitHub. I do a lot of open source stuff. I think it's an incredible collaboration tool for developers, and I kind of feel sad for some of the designers I work with because they're not able to kind of like leverage some of the power that's there. But we're trying to get some of our designers a little bit more involved in that. And there are designers that use GitHub and love it. I'm not denying that. It's just kind of the case that we have at Priceline. So GitHub, I was like, we should build a design system. We should build it on GitHub. Some of the reasons for that, make it open source from the start. That kind of takes it out of, this is hotels team's design system, or this is rental cars design system. It kind of gives a shared ownership across all the teams. It also kind of looks official when you have something public out there that people are like kind of like noticing. Wanted to make sure we had contributors from all the teams so that there was, again, that shared ownership. And also, I personally think it's a great professional experience for especially younger devs to kind of contribute to open source. I don't think it's necessary. I know some people like it on that topic, but I think if you can, and if your company encourages it, I like that a lot. And we've been pretty good with, this is our contributors graph. Shout out to everyone on here. I have more contributions than I want on here. I would actually rather see that kind of shift over. But we've got one person that's not even in the company. He was doing a, what was it called? Hacktoberfest? Sort of like a thing where you find good first issues, and he contributed. But we've got representation across all the major product teams, a lot of junior developers, a couple designers on here too, which historically at Priceline, designers were not designers that coded. They just kind of worked with developers and worked on their teams, but didn't actually get in the code base. I like to think about design systems and things like open source libraries. If you make it so good that people want to use it, that's great. I think if you try to enforce a design system, that can fly back in your face and people reject it. So that was kind of like the angle I was taking with this. Is that cursor bothering anyone else?
It's bothering me.
Can I just point it at this dot? No. Or as our CTO says, he likes to say, make it go viral. I like this concept. It's kind of cheesy, but so we started working on the design system. If you go into Priceline now, everyone talks about the design system. I know a lot of companies try to name their design system. There's Polaris, there's Primer, I'm forgetting others, but we just kind of call it the design system. And the thing I like about that is that people that are new to this concept can kind of go to medium.com or search on Google or search meetup.com and find a meetup like this. And they're like, oh, design system's a legitimate thing. I think the branding and kind of marketing in your company is really important. So that's kind of the background of where we are. Kind of want to talk about the current tooling we use. I'm, again, a UX developer, so I'm mostly talking about the developer side of things. I'm going to talk more about the design stuff. I'm around after. We use React. I love React. It's great. If you're not sure what that is, look it up. Style components. So there's a lot of CSS and JS libraries out there. I love CSS and I love style components. I don't think it's a thing that if you're a very hardcore CSS person, don't be afraid of this stuff. This stuff's awesome. We've got a lot of contributors to our design system. Some people are very strong CSS developers and other people aren't. Tools like style components let you abstract CSS out into React components so that the people that are don't want to write CSS are able to kind of consume that. How am I doing with time? Okay. We also use Jest, which is a testing library. Jest kind of helped introduce the idea of snapshots. So all our components that are in a design system have snapshot tests, which means if someone contributes to the design system, accidentally breaks something or changes the way it looks, you'll see a failing test. And if you make an intentional change, you say, I want to update the snapshot. It's a good way. It's kind of, a few years back, people were doing a lot of visual regression testing, which can be problematic because different browsers render things differently. You get a lot of false positives. It's a headache to set up. Just snapshot testing, really cool. You can also test more advanced things. Jest is not specific to React. It's a general JavaScript testing framework, but it's really good for React and things like design systems. We have our design system hooked into Travis CI, which is a continuous integration. If you submit a PR on GitHub and you make a boo-boo, you get a big red flag, and then you know to fix it. If everything's green, you can merge it with confidence. I think at Priceline, unit testing is kind of a thing that we're trying to get better at. Some teams are really great at it. Some teams are kind of like a little bit newer to the concept. So kind of having all this stuff set up in the design system, I think has been a good example for the front-end development team. It's really confused the designers, though, I have to say. I'm trying to figure out that problem. Sometimes they break snapshots, and I'm like, you gotta run update. We also use Styled System, which is something I started, which is kind of based on a lot of concepts that came out of work I did at Kickstarter and with base CSS, a lot of influence from Nicole, Sullivan, and like object-oriented CSS, and kind of weaving that back into React. I'm gonna zoom through this storybook. Is a isolated testing or isolated development environment. So you're able to actually build these components in React without having to start up an application. Really cool tool. We also use Slack. I like talking on Slack. PRs and issues in GitHub, great. I'm gonna skip this part. What's next? You gotta get this in. We just launched a documentation site. This is like just started, not super great, but kind of the idea of this is not only is it like, oh, here's our design system. It uses Markdown, which I think is a very accessible format for people to write in. We're trying to encourage the designers to get more involved in this and write some documentation that's not about the developer side, but more about how you use this stuff. It takes that Markdown, it uses something called React Live, so any of our component examples, you can edit them on the web page and kind of see how they work. Style Components documentation site also uses this, so like if you're new to Style Components, you can kind of go to their website and play with it. And it's all hooked into our Travis CI, so anytime someone contributes to the design system, say they update a Markdown file, that gets approved, merged to master, then the docs are automatically updated. HTML Sketchup is something I want to look into. It's very similar to React Sketchup. You can take components and spit them out into Sketch, if that's like something you like to use. I know there's some cool new tools that I would like to also export our components to, but that's a start. I also want to kind of encourage more involvement from our design team. They've all kind of like started to pick this up, but like we definitely started more from the developer side because of the needs that we had with React and kind of like sharing our code. And in honor of International Women's Day, I want to do a few shout outs. Nicole Sullivan, I give her a shout out almost every time I talk about this stuff. If you're unfamiliar with her, she kind of came up with this concept of object-oriented CSS. I feel like I've learned more from this person than anyone else about CSS architecture. And I've never met her in person, but really admire her work. Also, Laura Hogan, used to work with her at Etsy. She talks about performance and how that's a big consideration for the user experience, and kind of like got me to think about not only performance in a new light, but how do you kind of like drive that culture in a company? And I think she did an incredible job at Etsy. Jessica Harley, I worked with her at Kickstarter, and she really pushed me on some of the ideas that we were working on at Kickstarter and kind of helped shape what my library-based CSS ended up becoming. So definitely want to give a shout out to her. I also want to give a shout out to Gina Ann. She runs the SF chapter of Design Systems Coalition. She also does Clarity. And shout out because she's built a great community and she's awesome. And Diana, because Diana listens to me talk about React and doesn't complain about it. Also, very inspiring for making certain open source color tools. Thanks.
Thank you for embarrassing me. Okay. While we're doing the laptops swap over, there's some people that are, I can't seem to do that one-handed. If there's some people standing, there are a few, there's like 4 seats just over here. There's a few dotted around. If you're waiting for that moment where it's okay to run in front of people, then now's your time. So there's like, yeah, there's a bunch of seats up here. There's a couple. As long as there's one seat here, that's cool. Don't want people to get tired legs. Come on, Marco. Okay, if you've been sitting all day, it's cool to stay standing. Okay, so next up we have Chesley, who I've already mentioned. We work together at Etsy. So without further ado, over to you.
Hi, I'm Chesley. I'm a product design manager at Betterment, and I'm going to talk to you today about how we try to bake collaboration into our design system tooling. So first, what is Betterment? If you haven't heard of it, it's a robo-advisor or an automated investing service helping you figure out how to easily save and grow your money. It's like a 200-person company, 10-person product design team, 75 engineers, and a really small design systems working group called Style Closet that I help facilitate. And I took on this challenge in large part because of these women. So many of them have been mentioned tonight. We have Diana, Jess Harley, Megara, who maybe you've heard speak at this in the past, and then Kat Small. And all of them I got to work with at Etsy. So I was there for 5 years, and I saw like a true range. Oh, there's Megara in the back. I saw a true range of design system efforts go on there. So starting from like a small volunteer-led working group to a full-on team, and then maybe back down to just a few roles. But each of these women worked on our design system, and they just brought like a serious rigor and energy and skill to their work, whether it was creating or maintaining the system or leading the group or team. So whenever I'm faced with a challenge at my new role on Style Closet, I often think back to these women and like ask myself how they might handle the situation. So thank you all for all the energy and skill you've brought to your work. So what are we doing at Betterment? To answer that, I need to take you back 6 months ago, which is when we finished a major rebrand. This was our old brand, and this is what it looks like today. And it was a huge undertaking done by like a really small team, done across multiple websites, both of our apps, and they also created Betterment's first mobile web experience. So there was this really tight timeline, really small team of designers and developers, and they got it out on time, but what it meant was that our internal documentation was lacking. So this is, after the rebrand, this is what our internal doc site looked like. And like as you can see, it's kind of static and flat. There's no code examples, so like if you needed to use one of these patterns, you had to inspect the page to figure out how to find the code. And it was made on a different tech stack than the one that our website runs on. So it wasn't showing like actual component usage, and given time, these components were bound to fall out of sync. And from the design side, this was our like working file. Like as you can see, it's gigantic, really difficult to maneuver and use. The symbols, or they weren't even symbols, I think they're just graphics. They're not responsive. And we didn't have a process around adding to it or keeping it up to date. So we had a ton of work to do. Our Style Closet team is, there's a core group of 4 people, and then sort of lots of designers and occasional engineers who help out. But we decided to focus on redoing our documentation so that both designers and engineers could have tools that were easy to use and that were easy to contribute to. And we really want people to feel excited about using them too. Like Jackson said, like if you're excited, if the tool is that awesome, you'll use it and you'll feel a collective ownership over committing to it and maintaining it. So that's what we've been working on for the past 6 months, and this is where we are today. This is our doc site. It's built in Rails, so it's truly a living style guide. There's lots of documentation about how it works, how to get started, how to contribute, basically this whole left column. And then we feature this change log just to kind of not only highlight what's new, but try to normalize and popularize the idea of contributing, with the thinking that if you see, oh, this person I work with, or like I know easily added this small little thing, like I could do it, or I could talk to them about figuring out how to do it. And we have actual code examples, which is like the huge game changer. And on the design side, hopefully this will play. This is a demo of our new working solution. So instead of one big sketch file, we now have like a robust symbol library that lives in Sketch. It's hosted on GitHub for easy versioning. It's really easy to access the symbols using this plugin Sketch Runner. And we audited a ton of symbols, or plugins to figure out what's the most like seamless way you could easily pull up different symbols and add them to your flow. And then the name of the symbols matched our components on the doc site exactly. And we came up with a clearer process for how you actually add symbols and pull down the latest file. So now, oh, okay, hold on. Okay. Now our overall design and build process feels a bit more like this. We have 2 sets of tools that feel up to date and alive. We have documented processes and expectations for how to contribute to each. Our designers and engineers are speaking the same language. And this is all allowing us to have our most consistent, efficient, and seamless workflow yet, letting us do some of our best work yet. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chesley. That was awesome. Okay, and yeah, if you can plug that in. Sorry. I need to build up the strength so that I can plug dongles in with one hand. Okay, and so next up we have Noah Levin, who is from Figma, and some of you, people who know me know I am, oh God, know I'm a big fan. Speaking and typing your password in at the same time is fun. Could I ask you, yeah, sorry. There we go. And so I was really excited when they started doing the design systems dinners and meetups around the world, literally. And so when they were like, if you want one in your city, I immediately replied and said, hey, well, I actually run a meetup, so maybe we can collaborate. And so that's why you're all here now, and I'm really happy for the turnout. So without further ado, over to Noah and to hear about your version of tools for collaboration.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Diana, for organizing these. This is awesome. Super happy to be here. Thanks to all the speakers and thanks to Meetup. This is super cool. Actually, just got back from India last week where we did one of these, which was really, really fun. So I'm also like kind of, I don't even know what time zone I'm in because I was just in San Francisco 2 days ago, and so just kind of roll with it. Just a little bit about myself. Worked at a bunch of really wonderful companies. Feel really lucky. Lived in New York for 2 years, so it's fun to be back. And I miss it in a lot of ways. And also excited to be back in San Francisco. And so just some really important shout outs for International Women's Day. The first one is for my mom, who is honestly like one of the most incredible people I've ever met, and was the only female mechanical engineer in her entire graduating class at Carnegie Mellon, and incredibly inspiring to me. Raised my brother and I basically on our own, and now makes robots for the military that detect landmines, all these things. I could do a whole talk on this. I'm not going to do that. Also wanted to give a shout out to all the wonderful women at ClassPass. I think at least one of them is here today, Nicole, and just an incredible group of women who've built such an awesome company to help people get healthier and live fuller lives. And feel really lucky to have gotten to know so many different kind of like product managers, engineers, designers, and all of them are worth following for the incredible things that they've done. Could also easily fill an hour with time of them as well. But we're here to talk about design systems, and in particular, I think when we talk about design systems, we usually reference like things that have been around for a while, like the Apple HIG or material design. And more than ever, we have like a ton of different tools and conferences and these meetups and books on this great stuff. And so it's kind of trending more than ever before. Or so I thought, and I looked up Google Trends because I wanted this like really cool spiking chart, and then I looked it up, and like somehow since 2005, it's like gone down, but I think it's honestly definitely gone up. I think it's just that designers aren't actually representative of the whole world, but yeah, so that was supposed to be the other way. And we've talked a lot about like, a lot of people way smarter and with a lot more experience than me have talked at length about like why to do them, how to do them. So I'm not really going to go over some of that, except I will explain how to do them with Figma a little bit. But also, I wanted to make an attempt at like going back in time to see when maybe they started. And so this might be a stretch. I was talking to Diana about this yesterday, and I was like, I don't know if this is going to work, but I'm going to try it, which is to go super far back, 40,000 years ago, to cave paintings. And if you see how language evolved, we had these symbols, right? And kind of looking at this as a design system, super interesting to me, right? Like all these different cultures had developed their own system for language. And so you can see they're intended to mean certain things, and they've been different depending on, you can imagine different products or things like that. And over time, that evolved from symbols to maybe kind of grunts and gestures and mumbles and before kind of spoken language. And that evolved eventually into written and spoken language, right? And it took a long time, but eventually people were able to speak together. And I think this could be a stretch, but I don't know. I think maybe just as our communication systems have evolved in some way, our design systems have as well, or at least the way that we communicate as teams. So for example, we had for a long time really just sketches to communicate what we were building. And eventually we had this idea of components that meant things on the internet, like a dropdown meant the same thing to lots of people. And those started evolving. And over time, we got these better tools that allowed us to show demos and prototypes, which were much better than these sketches and wireframes. And now we're at a point where we have these design systems that are coded up entirely. So you don't even really need to show a prototype at all. You can just build things directly with code. And so I think it's evolved in a different way, but in a much faster rate. But I think that there's some parallels there that I thought were kind of cool. So a little bit about Figma and designing a design tool, which I think is super interesting. Just out of curiosity, how many of you have tried it? Raise your hand if you've tried it. That's kind of, okay, about half, that's awesome. Hopefully more of you after this, I don't know. So the idea is that lots of people are contributing to the design process, right? Everyone is contributing in some way. And there's also a lot of tools, obviously, as we know as well. And what I think Figma has done and what convinced me to kind of move back across the country to work there is that first it has to kind of win you over as an individual designer, right? So it has to have all the features that you expect from Sketch or Adobe or other kinds of products. And also kind of does it all in one place. So whether it's like high fidelity design, prototyping, code inspection, all that stuff. But then it won sort of like our team over. When I was at ClassPass, we used it a lot. And it can do all kinds of things like designing in real time together or being able to see everyone's files in one place. We didn't have to use Dropbox anymore. We could just organize ourselves in these projects and easily see what anyone was working on and have a real-time, up-to-date version of what we were doing. And what I'm going to talk about now is how you can use Figma with design systems, which I think is one of the most compelling parts about it, at least for me. And so I'm going to kind of walk you through how to create one. And the first thing you do, so you open up a file, right? It loads. And right away, one of the most powerful things is if you join a company, normally you'd have to go and find all this documentation, go ahead and download all these files to get started, maybe even the fonts. But in Figma, you just click on this little shared library section, and you have all of these different asset libraries directly in the tool. And if you search for something like button, you get all the different buttons across all those different systems if you want them. And so right in line, you can just kind of drag it and drop it in. And already you have like a component. So at Figma, internally, we have a design system, and these are pieces of it you can imagine for the design tool itself. So another example that's maybe more complex as a component is like a properties panel on the sidebar, right? And what's interesting is we don't really have like a documented website for all this stuff, because what better way to use it than to have it be completely embedded so that you can use it kind of directly as you're designing, which is kind of fun. And then you can imagine even more complex examples, right? So you can drag in an entire component of the entire Figma UI as well and detach it if you want to get really custom with it or keep it in place. But how does that actually work? And also, couple more fun examples that I thought would be fun to like kind of point out. So we use it for lots of things other than regular just like interface components. We actually use it for anything like if I needed company logos for a slide, then we kind of embed all these SVGs in there so that anyone can just kind of drag them in. Same for like Facebook has done an incredible job producing these device templates, so we put them all in there as well for our team, so you can just drag and drop any device template you would need, or even just the faces of people in the company, which is really fun to use for real examples. And photography if you wanted as well. So you can kind of publish anything as a component, and here's how you do it. And you can imagine that all of those just basically translate into files. And so this is actually our internal kind of Figma, and you can see basically there's these different projects, and we kind of organize all these components in one place. And so if I were to make one, this is all that you have to do. So you have a button, you choose to click Create Component out of it. So this is, imagine you've started it from scratch. You create this component, and then you decide to publish it. So you click Publish, and it says, all right, like it's been published to your library, so now anyone can access it. Let's say you make a change. So how do you handle change logs, all this kind of stuff can get really complicated, which is why GitHub has been such an amazing tool for so many people, is that you can handle a lot of these kind of mergers. And so in this case, imagine you change a color piece of it, and then you notice that we kind of badge, hey, like there's been a change, would you like to publish it? You can choose to publish it. It'll show you the diff right there, which is really fun. And then you can publish it. And then meanwhile, imagine you're a designer who wants to use that button. So now you open up your file and you're designing some kind of card UI, and you've used this button in your app. And now imagine that someone went ahead and changed the content on you. And so you'd have to figure out, do those just happen? Like, how do you manage those mergers? And so what we do is we just pop up a little thing that says, hey, like a component has changed. Like, do you want to look at it and do you want to change it? And it's up to you. Like, you don't have to change it. It doesn't break things if you don't want it to. And then you can review the change, see what it does, update it, and right away you've like accepted that change, and so it's there for you. So super, super fun, really like interesting way to kind of integrate your system directly inside of the tool that you're using. And it's certainly changed the way that I design. It's a lot of fun. Cool, so I think that's it, if I'm out of time. Otherwise, there's more stuff too.
That's perfect, thank you. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to do a little bit of shuffling to move the chairs and start our Q&A session. So another opportunity if you want to move from standing to sitting, but totally do what you want to do. So as a reminder, the hashtag on Twitter is AskNYCDSC. So it would be really great if you can tweet your questions, and we might throw out to the audience if there's time. Mike from Meetup is going to be lovely and help me with moderating those. And then if I could just get a hand with moving the chairs, that would be great, and we'll kick off in a few minutes. Okay, so this person needs, which is that we can use any of the handheld mics for the audience. Yeah, you can have that. Okay. So each person.
Neutral and
Okay, is where you want them in orders.
oh, great, yeah. 1, 2, 3, 4. Starts from somewhere else. I was just doing the order we're in. Okay.
You don't have to say, just
Yeah, this one's wired. Are we sharing these, or is it?
I think she has one there.
Oh no, there's one per person, right?
Yes.
Wow. Fancy.
No handoffs required.
okay. We're gonna have to do some. We're gonna do some.
It's awesome. I tried to like write a lot of the jokes, and as I was like writing each one, you had to edit one. Like at one point, I had typed out the like CSS of International Women's Day joke, and then as I did it, I was like, this doesn't read the same as it does.
Yeah, can I just have you move back a tiny bit?
Oh,
Sorry.
all of us are just,
Just lower a little bit.
yeah.
Better?
Just so it's aligned.
Oh, thank
Sit
you.
up straight. I think 90% of that was jokes. if there's takeaway other than CSS is a woman. I don't know.
There was.
Okay, I think we're ready. Awesome. Okay, I'm gonna kick the Q&A off with a direct question, different question for each speaker, and then we'll throw out to audience questions if there are any. So Natalia, I related to your presentation a lot because I'm a designer that has learned to code. I don't think I am as cool as you in terms of making Moleskine style UI tools to help designers inspect stuff. But I wanted to ask you, what did you find? What do you think is the biggest barrier for designers learning to code? And is there any tips you can share with folks in terms of like how to get over that barrier as a designer, or how developers can help designers?
Yes. I'm really glad you asked that question because I think I want to zoom out and talk about the larger issue in the industry. It's called the moving goalpost. I think everyone in this room at some point has experienced that moving goalpost of like, all right, designers, you need to code. It's like, great, I did. Now what? You don't know enough JavaScript. You know two things, and you need to know one really, really well. Like, no matter what you do, someone out there is going to tell you you're doing the wrong thing. Here's the right thing, and that's what you need to do. So I think for designers, especially, like, what is a designer? What is the skill set of a designer? I feel like if I asked every single person in here, what's the skill set of a web designer? We would have like categories of people, camps, and in fighting in the middle here somewhere. And that's just not fair because for all the talk we do about the diversity of backgrounds and skill sets that like everybody brings something to a team, we sure are really quick to say like, accept that, don't bring that, don't design this way, don't do this, this is the new way thing, like that you have to do stuff. So I think the biggest barrier is just the vague, what is a designer? Once you do the thing that somebody says you have to do it, you're like, oh, you didn't do it right. The moving goalpost and the constant, like, what are we supposed to do? And so just to make it a little more optimistic and nice and not say like it's doom and gloom and you're never gonna be enough, to say like that means you're really in charge of deciding what this industry is, what a designer is, what your contribution to every team is, and that you don't actually have to be siloed or kept to a single kind of job title or job role. Anywhere you can find your skills, whether it's from another career and you switched into tech, or if it's from another project you did, or something you learned in art school, like if you're a designer, or something if you're a more of like an engineer moving into design. Bring that in and don't, like, these barriers are arbitrary, really. Rarely do you even do the same thing team to team. So just ignore what people are saying, and it's a lot easier said than done, but like somebody's making this stuff up. You might as well start making it up for yourself too.
Thank you. You've got the mic. So next up, I'm going to ask Jackson a question. I'm going to ask you a really difficult question, actually. So you talked about how you feel like designers perhaps are maybe sad they don't have something like GitHub, and you spend a lot of time making tools. You love tools. What do you think is like the future? What's next up with tools, or what's going to help solve that problem?
I don't think I can answer that in a short sentence. Yeah, I think what I meant with what I said with GitHub is that if you look at GitHub and how people used to develop software before that, GitHub has been transformative in like really pushing open source. And the amount of code that I write that's actually being used in production is like a small percentage, and I'm actually like building off of this huge community of open source software. I think design tools are like starting to come into that kind of realm, but I think like the power for like things like design systems where you can, like in Figma, you can just pull a button in and kind of like tweak it to be your own thing. Like I'm really excited about that sort of stuff. And when I say I'm sad, I'm like Yeah, designers are confused by Git. It's complicated. When I first learned about Git, I thought it was like time travel, and it blew my mind. I want like designers to kind of like feel that excitement about it as well. As far as the future goes, I think like web-based tech, like Figma uses Electron, and they've done a lot of work in that. And it's a progressive web app. They do some like web assembly stuff. From the developer side, that's like super advanced. And then what that means for designers and being able to kind of, you know, you don't have to spend, how much did Adobe used to cost like 10 years ago? It was like $1,000 for a license and everyone ripped it off. Like you don't have to do that with the tools now. It's like great. So I think, I don't know what the future, I have a lot of ideas of what the future could be, but I don't know specifically what it's going to be. Is
That's cool. I deliberately asked you a hard question. Thank you. So next, Chesley, I wanted to ask you, since like me, you worked at Etsy and then moved to another company and worked on design systems there. What are some of the common themes or similar situations you've noticed between those two companies that perhaps you could share, that some people could, like, you know, when you're that new person starting off, like, could we learn from your experience? Sorry, also difficult.
Let me think about that. I think as a designer, it can be hard to learn how to work in the system as a new person, or how to like push the system. I've definitely noticed that at Etsy and then now at Betterment. And sometimes we push the system and we don't fully, truly like appreciate. Okay, we designed this new component. We want to put it into our style guide, but we don't totally appreciate all the different variables that we need to consider to do that. So there's definitely there's a rigor that comes with creating a new pattern that I think designers struggle with sometimes. Sort of like Natalia was saying with like, I just see the boxes and you're like, communicate to me like how this is going to work across all these different variations. How's it going to work on mobile web? How will it look on tablet? So that's probably one of the larger things I see happening.
Awesome, thank you. And finally, Noah. I have like a question and a backup question because I'm not sure what you can answer. Is there anything you can share that's upcoming with Figma that we might be excited to hear? And if not, what are some of the common misconceptions about what Figma can or can't do that you feel like some of us might not know and that can be really helpful in design systems?
Yeah, I sadly can't talk about roadmap stuff too much. I tried.
Damn, really try.
Misconceptions, yeah, I mean, probably a lot of things. I think, well, firstly, the most common one maybe is just that web technology, maybe can't handle a design tool or the power that you would need, which I hope, with the talent that we've seen from the team is you can, like it's fast, actually, it works. But I think, an equally interesting misconception is the cost of switching a tool. I think a lot about like how similar in some ways these tools are. Like they feel very similar. There's a lot of like, learned behavior and patterns. And I think for some reason it takes a lot of convincing for people to try something different. And I think it's kind of like, if you like live in your apartment, you have all this like furniture, and you've been living in it for a while, and you're really happy with the way that it's set up, and you really, you make it your home, and you enjoy it, and you live in it every day. And then someone says like, all right, like I've got a great apartment for you. It's like it's across right near where yours is now. I've actually even taken all your furniture and mostly put it in the same place. It's still there, like I promise. And also it's like maybe it's got another room now, or there's like this other thing that you can do now that you can't do, or whatever it is. And yet it still feels like I don't want to leave my house. Like I can't leave this thing that it's like my home. Like there's too many, even if it's like just it could do all those things and more. But so it's really complicated, I think. And I think a misconception is like I don't have time, I think is a misconception. Like I'm not going to be able to do this. It's not, no one's going to come with me if I try it, or this or that. But I think it's a lot of times it's just about giving it a shot, I guess. I don't know. I think it's definitely hard for any kind of, I think any industry probably where you're used to a tool, or like, I'm sure it's more complicated with things like cars or other sorts of things where like, it's even more delicate what you can change and what you can't, or it's a matter of like life and death, which fortunately we don't have to deal with design tools, I don't think. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I think I can relate to the I don't have time to do this thing that will actually save me time situation. I'm sure a lot of us do in design systems. Okay, we're going to do a couple of questions from the Twitters, and then we'll throw to the audience. And I don't want to make this go too long because I'm sure you all want to have time to mingle too. So sorry I've got my back to you, but let's do this one. Okay, so this one's for Chesley. Who were embedments for person team building the New Living Style Guide? What were their disciplines and their skill sets? And where did you start from? And this is from Laurie Boren on Twitter, so you can wave if you like, but thanks.
Yeah, so we had 2 engineers and a host of product designers, I would say. And some of the product designers code. Some are, very adept at it. Some are a little like newer to it. The engineers, specifically one who's in the audience today, Chris LaPresto, did a lot of the work. Like probably more than, I don't know, more than, they should have maybe. No, I mean, it was awesome, but, it was nights and weekends kind of thing too.
Awesome, thank you. This is a difficult question for Noah. So we've got Steve, if you want to wave. Many of us are currently using Sketch and InVision workflows. How do you position Figma as having an advantage over other tools in use today? So kind of following on from what you were saying. Do you want to wave, Steve? Oh.
Yeah,
cool. Oh, hi.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think like with those 2 specifically, I guess the idea is that in this case, it's kind of integrated in one, so you wouldn't have to kind of like switch too much between or have to like click a sync button ever again and things like that. So I think that's kind of first and foremost the most obvious advantage. I think another way to look at it is just the time it saves you. Like every little moment in what we do matters, right? Like every time we spend an extra like second to click, we feel, especially when you're living and breathing this tool all day, those details kind of add up. And so even just the idea of like a link that you can share now that has, it's always up to date. Like you don't have to question like, is this the right thing? Am I looking at the right thing? We heard a story the other day, I think it was like maybe Slack or somewhere, where they were designing and they saw like a multiplayer cursor come in from an engineer on a design that wasn't finished. And because they saw that they were in the file, they could be like, oh, wait, like don't build this yet, like it's not actually done. And so that moment alone to me is I guess like a big one. Like that could have saved like weeks in some cases where, so I think just like having this single source of truth, having all this stuff in one place, I think that makes a big difference.
Thank you. Okay, I'll throw to the audience. Does anyone have any questions? Okay, all the way at the back. I'll run over here.
This is kind of for Noah, but I kind of was hoping that maybe the rest of y'all would weigh in, or even like everyone sitting down. And it kind of has to do with your analogy of like leaving your home for the new apartment. And so my question is, how important is it for people who are considering moving from Sketch to Figma? This thing, and actually Jackson, you mentioned it a little bit as well with the HTML Sketch app and then the React Sketch app. So, and Noah, you kind of alluded to it in your cave art to modern history of design. It looked like your latest shot was, you mentioned prototyping, right? And that was your sort of previous shot, and then your final shot. So I feel like right now there's this sort of arms race with prototyping where everyone's trying to get the smoothest animation, simulation, swiping motion, where I really think that's not going to end well. And I feel like the modern move is this HTML Sketch app, React Sketch app. So I know you can't talk about timelines or roadmaps, but React Figma app, HTML Figma app, is this important to anyone else? Like, is this something that people are, does this make sense to anyone?
I'm gonna say, like, your question is like, is that where Figma and you feel like that's where other tools should be heading, right? You wanna have a connection between the code and the design tool, yeah.
Right, this push-pull from engineer to designer that is being done in these cases of HTML Sketchup and React Sketchup. How important is
Yeah. So I don't know if that's a question that no one can answer.
How important is it to Figma, or the Figma team, or how important is it to? Oh,
Yeah.
I guess maybe you could weigh in. Is this of any importance to Figma? And then the rest of y'all that are on the panel, like, how important is this to y'all? And maybe even just like show of hands, like, do people care about this stuff?
I have a thought. Right now the tools out there, like there's React Sketchup that you've probably seen. HTML Sketchup seems to do a slightly better job. The reason I point those out, and I think the reason they exist, is because our design team today uses Sketch. We've also got contracts with InVision. They may start to use InVision Studio when that comes out. I know some of the designers are excited about Figma. So like whatever tool they end up using, I want to make sure that, from the code perspective, is kind of like what Chesley mentions too. It's like we want developers and designers to be speaking the same language. So as much as we can make that possible and as easy as we can make that, that's kind of where I'm coming from. But I think it's like, Noah probably can't say anything, but I'd be really surprised if you don't see more code, like integration tools with Figma in the future. It's just my guess.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, and like obviously I can't speak to roadmap stuff, but I think the like handoff process, if you will, definitely needs a lot of help. I think when it comes to like really delightful, you also mentioned in your questions sort of like polished animations or things that like are really detailed, and I think you were hinting that like you can get down this pattern of like really focusing on a lot of those details, and then all of a sudden it's like, well, how does your developer work with that? And I think there's like, in some ways you can imagine sometimes it gets like maybe further apart or harder to speak the same language. And so I guess I would just agree that there's obviously a gap, and there's a need for things that are like a little bit more direct, I guess, and more directly connected to what's real. We were joking at one point when we were trying to make our internal design system that like maybe instead of making this like perfect thing, we should just like recreate all the screenshots essentially of our existing app, because usually it's more realistic to what you're doing. Like I'm sure most of you have hacked on top of a screenshot before. And so like it's kind of funny sometimes to think that way too. Like obviously the ideal solution is to improve it and to change it to where you want it to be, but other times you kind of need it to be real and what it is in that moment. So I think there's a lot of stuff in there that's worth poking into at some point.
Thank you. I just realized we're meant to be using this mic in the middle of the room for questions, so whoops. And I know Ada Kinley has a question, who also has spoken at the meetup, so over to you. There's probably an on button.
Works now. Okay. My question is how to include people that are not designers and engineers into like these design tools, because I think in some cases design system is more than like UI and code. It's more like content and voice and tone and all this stuff. So I'm wondering if people can come talk about that.
I love talking about that. No, God, I feel like you just like were planted in the audience for this question. As we all know, it's not just like a bunch of JavaScript developers on an app. There are many stakeholders and many people who all have their own concerns. Like that's, there's a system of us with all our different skill sets. And a lot of times we get this conversations like the asset handoff between design and development, like that's the only kind of back and forth volley that we have. But in terms of building a design system, getting these tools and getting buy-in from the various people who like very much care about your product and what you're doing, what your systems are and how you're collaborating, I feel like you have to start trying to talk their language. And I know it's like, oh, speak the language of, someone cares more about the SEO and all that. But that's really true. Like if you are writing semantic HTML, that's gonna really go a long way with SEO. And so that's the like, hey, we should really take time to write our components well and make sure they're actually the thing we want online. If somebody is, you could make the moral argument for accessibility or just in general, like, hey, if we don't meet accessibility, a lot of times we can't like close a contract with someone because they're like, sorry, you don't meet the requirements. We lose these licenses, we lose this business. So you could make the case for, you know, this is just number of licenses we can sell. This is why we need to make this a priority, so that when we get an asset handoff from design to development, the mental model of the designer is transferred through, and it's executed at all levels of excellence across the board. And so, you know, it's really interesting how we accept these levels of abstraction over, you know, because the browser all still does this, like HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Like, browsers are still doing the same old thing, but we keep doing these levels of abstraction in software. Like, we've got React that just makes making UI stuff, like, it's just so fun and so great. And we're seeing the emergence of, like you were saying, like the React Sketchup, and we're seeing these abstractions happening on the design side when it's just like pretty uncomfortable, like pretty new, and it's like you don't want to leave your comfortable, you know, couch metaphor or like home metaphor. But I think ultimately creating tools for collaboration, to get it back to like the theme of the night, that's going to extend across the whole team. Anybody who has like a KPI, or anybody who has like a stake in your app, or whatever you're building, is going to want to see that you're creating a system that exists when the main people who built it go to another job, you know, because if something runs on your own steam and you go on vacation and it just shuts down and stops, then you really haven't built anything at all. And so that's why I think these design systems, like, we keep coming back to the documentation, and we keep coming back to the tools, because the churn is so high in this industry. And, you know, getting people, I feel like I kind of wandered away from your question, but like, how do you communicate the value of this? It's like, when so-and-so high contributor leaves, we're not stopping. When we build these really awesome components that are reusable, they're the best version of this component. We're not reinventing the wheel each time, and we can do it much more quickly. Like, there's a value there's a value for every single person on the team, I feel like, in working with design systems. So hopefully that kind of gets at it.
Awesome, thank you. One more question, and then we'll break out for social time. I was going to, but it's okay. We can go to you. People can answer Twitter later. Do you want to actually do that one? Because I think it's on the actual camera, if that's okay.
A follow-on to that about language of the design system in the organization. Do you have any tricks or war stories about getting the whole organization to use the language of the design system? And how far has it gone? Have you ever had the CEO come up to you and say, oh, let's do that with the big header and the 3-card center and the big blue button CTA at the bottom? Boom.
You got it, boss. No.
Great question. Whoever wants to go.
So I will say we have a hug component in our design system. I refer to it as the shrug component. It's a very unfortunate name, but just wanted to add that.
That should be a question. Your favoritely named components. Anyone else want to add to that one? You stumped them. It's difficult. Okay, I'll ask the question that I was gonna ask, and then we'll wrap up. I think so. This is to the panel, so whoever wants to answer, and I can relate to this question. So for the panel, how do you go about prioritizing a design system when engineering have their sprints already committed? And I feel like that could go for not just engineering, to be honest. Thanks, Steve.
I can start, I guess. So, I mean, I think it depends. Like, I guess the question's probably inferring like maybe the next sprint or next 2 sprints and so on. And what's that? It could be like a quarter until you get, yeah. Yeah, I think, I mean, I'm sure maybe you guys have heard some of this advice before, but like oftentimes just finding your evangelist, obviously, like which engineer maybe cares the most, and kind of nudging them and hoping that you can build a strong enough relationship that you can get them excited about it. I mean, ultimately, the hope is that you're saving them time, but in the short term, sometimes you have to make those trade-offs, and not everyone's willing to do it, especially if they don't see like the business value right away. But you know, just oftentimes, like when I was at ClassPass, there was a developer named Jan who really cared a lot, and it was hard because it wasn't just if you wanted to do it, it would happen. Like you still had to get buy-in from another place at some point, so it did take a while. So I wish there was an easier answer, but I think like that's the only thing I've seen so far is like finding people who care somewhere, and then like kind of sneaking it in somehow.
I would just say, those times you finished your sprint and got to go home for the rest of the week? That never happens, does it? So maybe I have the worst advice, but I think it's part of the work, and you just say, like, that's what it takes. If I'm making something, I will also then document it in a way that then save us time later. Maybe that'll get you fired, so do not take this advice. But I feel like I've never been in a situation where down the line people are like, you really took a really long time on that design system that actually is much faster now. This is great. Never mind. Like, nobody's yelled at me yet, so do first, ask forgiveness later. What is that phrase?
Yeah, I think +1 with the make documentation part of the work. We added tests to our design system at GitHub so that if you don't add documentation when you add a new component, it fails. So like it's got to be seen as part of the work. Did anyone else want to add to that? No? Okay. You can talk to Jackson later. He's obviously got some thoughts. Okay, well, thank you very much. We can hang out here for a bit if you're all willing. There's plenty of food, delicious food and drinks. So please eat and drink the food. And we can hang out here for a bit until about 9 o'clock. So yeah, and thank you very much to all our speakers. Thanks to Figma for sponsoring, and thanks to Meetup for hosting.